the feces on the ground and carefully smelling it. It's yak dung. He immediately gathered his tribe and covered their bodies with mud from the ground to mask their human scent. Their target this time was the yak herd at the cliff ahead. They crawled forward slowly and cautiously, trained and ready to go. They were afraid of startling the yaks, as even an ant on their hand would become breakfast in the next second. At Tao's command, the tribespeople quickly stood up and charged towards the herd, shouting together with a determination to fight to the death. But the yaks were not willing to give up without a fight. They threw their spears and quickly formed a neat fence, blocking the path of the yaks. In a panic, the yaks instinctively turned and ran towards the cliff, falling into the abyss one after another. Yes, they could quickly obtain a large amount of food in this simple and crude way. However, there was still a stubborn yak that refused to give up. It suddenly turned and charged towards a boy, Kida, Tao's child, with great force. This was his first hunting action in his life, and facing the fierce yak, he was at a loss and scared, turning and running away. But he was quickly knocked off his feet by the yak, and it wasn't over yet. The yak turned its head and charged towards Kida again, lifting him up on its horns and running towards the cliff with all its might. When Tao saw Kida in danger, he quickly threw his spear. Although it hit the yak, it couldn't stop the yak's determination to die together. When Tao and his tribe arrived at the edge of the cliff, they saw Kida hanging onto a rock halfway up the mountain. Tao shouted to Kida not to let go, but in the next moment, the rock broke apart and fell down. Tao was stunned, watching Kida fall. Luckily, Kida didn't fall into the valley. He landed on a protruding rock. Tao was anxious and wanted to go down and rescue Kida, but the tribe pulled him back. At this location, even if Kida didn't die, his chances of survival were almost zero. As the leader, he had to bring the food back to the tribe before the snow blocked the mountain pass. As night fell, the grieving Tao was still kneeling at the edge of the cliff, shouting Kida's name. He still believed that Kida could wake up, but after a night passed, Kida still didn't move. In the end, they tearfully built a tomb for Kida and reluctantly began the journey back with the tribe. However, not long after Tao left, a vulture landed on Kida. Seeing such a delicious body, it went straight for Kida's mouth. Kida was instantly awakened and instinctively slapped the vulture, which fell off the cliff. He got up and checked his surroundings, realizing that he was at the edge of an abyss. He called out for Tao in fear, but only the empty echo of the valley answered him. Kida didn't want to die. He began to try to climb down, but the cliff was too steep, and he accidentally stepped on nothing. Luckily, he grabbed onto the rock wall in time, but he had no foothold under his feet. Out of his survival instinct, Kida exerted all his strength to support his entire body. After who knows how long, the sky suddenly became cloudy, and it started to rain heavily. In no time, the rainwater at the bottom of the cliff had gathered into a river. Kida realized that this might be his only chance to survive, so he gathered his courage, jumped into the turbulent river, and miraculously woke up the next day from the mud. At this point, one of his legs was unable to move, and when he took off his shoe, he realized that his foot was already swollen like a pig's trotter. He wedged his sprained foot between two stones, gritted his teeth, and twisted it hard to set the bone. Then he made a makeshift splint with a stick and hobbled towards the cliff. After walking for a long time, he finally arrived at the top of the cliff, but what he saw in front of him was a stone monument his father had erected for him. Kida was desperate and kicked the stone off the cliff with all his might. Just then, he heard the howling of wolves not far away. It turned out that a pack of wolves had arrived. He quickly got up and hobbled in the opposite direction, but the wolves behind him chased after him relentlessly, and he was forced to the side of a dead tree. When he tried to climb up the tree, a hungry wolf bit onto his boot. In a panic, he drew his knife and stabbed the wolf, finally escaping from danger. However, the pack of wolves under the tree still refused to leave and kept staring at him, unable to do anything. Kida had to spend the night lying in the tree. When he woke up the next day, the pack of wolves had finally left, leaving only the wounded wolf lying on the ground, barely alive. Kida first tied the knife to a stick as a defensive weapon, then slowly approached the wounded wolf, ready to put it out of its misery. But when he saw the helpless and fearful look in the wolf's eyes, Kida's heart softened. Being inherently kind, he had never killed anything before. However, in order to protect himself, he carefully approached the wolf and quickly tied its mouth shut when it was caught off guard. Then he carried it to a cave where they spent the night together. The next morning, he crushed some herbs and applied them to his injured foot. Just then, the wolf broke free from its binds, but Kida remained calm and, with kindness in his heart, offered it a bowl of clean water. As he approached the wolf, it bared its teeth, growling lowly with a fierce look in its eyes, but Kida kept soothing the wolf and demonstrating how to drink the water. The wolf seemed to sense Kida's good intentions and gradually calmed down. Kida then lowered his head and body, trying to convey his sincerity to the wolf. Eventually, the wolf completely let down its guard and lapped up the water with its tongue. Kida breathed a sigh of relief and smiled happily. Later, He cleaned the wolf's wounds with maggots to prevent infection and guided it to eat the maggots as a source of food. But the food was far from sufficient if he wanted to survive. That afternoon, Gk found a rabbit in the wild and, in order to satisfy his hunger, he eventually mustered the courage to kill it. Back in the cave, Gk tried to start a fire by rubbing wood together, but the wolf slowly approached, trying to snatch the rabbit meat. Without hesitation, Gk slapped the wolf and took a savage bite of the raw meat, asserting his dominance and making it clear that he was the leader. The wolf, intimidated by his display, retreated to its spot. That night, Gk finally ate the warm roasted rabbit meat, while the wolf looked on hungrily. Seeing its good behavior, Gk set some ground rules for the wolf, explaining that if it wanted food, it had to wait for him to distribute it. The wolf silently agreed, and Gk threw a piece of meat to it. After they were both full, they gazed up at the sky, seemingly missing their families. After a few days of rest, Gk's injuries had mostly healed, and he decided to return home before the snow closed off the mountain passes. He also wanted the wolf to find its pack, but the wolf stubbornly refused to leave, lying on the ground. Seeing this, Gk didn't urge it any further and set out alone. However, the wolf silently followed him, taking a few steps for every step Gk took. When Gk stopped, the wolf stopped too. Frustrated, he threw a stick at the wolf to drive it away, but to his surprise, the wolf grabbed the stick and ran ahead with renewed energy. Gk looked puzzled and followed the wolf to see several wild boars at the foot of the mountain. The wolf quickly rushed towards them, while Gk nervously raised his spear. However, when the wild boars were driven away by the wolf and ran towards Gk, he could only watch helplessly as they escaped. The wolf looked at Gk with disdain, unable to believe that he had such a pig-like teammate. Despite Gk's explanations, the wolf was disappointed that they had missed their prey. However, the two eventually reached an understanding and continued on their journey home together. Gk named the wolf Alpha. With Alpha's help, their hunting efficiency improved significantly, and they would assist each other when hungry or tired, even enjoying a refreshing bath in the lake. What's more, Alpha was also skilled at catching fish, and after spending some time together, they had developed a deep trust in each other. At night, Alpha would sleep beside Gk to keep him warm and wake him up in the morning. These days were very enjoyable for Gk. However, good things don't last forever. Winter came, and thick snow covered the entire mountain. Despite the harsh weather, they continued hunting and traveling. But suddenly, as they walked, the ice beneath Gk's feet cracked, and he fell down into the rush, gently licking his cheek. After regaining some strength, Gk used a flint to start a bonfire. He took off his frozen clothes and lay in the snow, hugging Alpha to keep each other warm. The next day, they had to continue their journey. Suddenly, they saw a tent not far away, with an old man sitting next to it. Gk was overjoyed and ran towards the tent quickly. However, upon arrival, he discovered that the old man outside the tent had already been frozen into an ice sculpture. He had to enter the tent to look for food, but after searching for a long time, he found nothing. In frustration, his weakened body coughed up blood. Gk was silent for a long time, but he did not give up because he really wanted to reunite with his family. He took the old man's bow and arrow and continued on his journey. However, shortly after they resumed their journey, a massive snowstorm came at them. To make matters worse, a pack of hunting dogs was chasing them from behind. Gk had no choice but to lead Alpha into the blizzard, but the dogs were still hot on their heels. Just as they were about to catch up, Gk and Alpha managed to slip into a cave. Gk picked up his bow and arrow, keeping watch at the entrance. Fortunately, the hunting dogs did not follow them in. Thinking they had escaped danger, Alpha remained on high alert, gazing at the other side of the cave and growling softly. Gk turned his head to see a black panther slowly emerging from the depths of the cave. The massive beast charged at Gk, but Alpha intercepted it halfway. Despite knowing that its small frame was no match for the panther, Alpha fearlessly engaged in a brutal fight. With Alpha on the verge of being devoured, Gk picked up his bow and arrow and shot the panther, killing it instantly. But Alpha remained motionless, and Gk anxiously called out its name. Eventually, Alpha managed to free itself from the panther's corpse and stood up shakily. However, despite Gk's relief, Alpha collapsed onto the ground. Its body was covered in wounds, and Gk gently cradled Alpha in his lap, stroking it tenderly. Although they were strangers who had met by chance, Alpha had saved Gk's life multiple times. Therefore, Gk made a firm decision to ensure Alpha's safe return home. Later on, they roasted the Black Panther and enjoyed a hearty meal. The next day, Gk and Alpha continued their journey through the endless white snow and ice. After an unknown amount of time, they finally stumbled upon a stone monument left by their tribe, indicating that they were close to home. As the piercing snowstorm grew stronger, Alpha's injuries caused its steps to become increasingly slow. Eventually, Alpha could no longer go on and collapsed. Gk approached and gently stroked Alpha, pleading with it to hold on a little longer as they were almost home. However, Alpha's eyes had lost their former light, and it was clear that it could no longer continue. Despite this, Gk refused to give up. He picked up Alpha and continued on. Braving the fierce wind and snow, they traveled through the night, over mountains and through valleys, relying on their last bit of willpower. Finally, Kida caught a glimpse of their long-lost tribe and smiled with relief, dragging his exhausted body. Kida slowly made his way to the camp. When he arrived with Alpha in his arms, he collapsed in relief. Tao was shocked to see his son Kida, unable to believe what he was seeing. He quickly embraced Kida, and Kida's mother ran over in tears, thinking she would never see him again. Overwhelmed with emotion at Kida's miraculous return, he immediately asked his father to save his companion, Alpha. Kida then fell asleep. When he awoke, he discovered that Alpha had given birth to several wolf pups. It turned out that Alpha had been pregnant all along, despite the dangers Alpha had faced while